psychologists, people who have blessed our world, people who have created the modern world. And I was just sitting there thanking God for this rich history of what a university like that has meant to the whole world. Suddenly, I changed. I realized that although the great men who created the modern world were products of these universities, in fact, the greatest men who really birthed the modern age were not the products of these universities. They were the ones who were killed and burned by these universities. They were rebels. Wycliffe, they couldn't burn him for historical reasons, for he was born in around 1320, died in 1384. For the time that he was really active as a reformer, there were at least two popes, one in Rome and one in France, in Avignon. And for a while there was a third pope, and they were busy fighting each other for supremacy, for establishing themselves, and they didn't have sufficient time and energy to take care of this professor there in Oxford, who had succeeded in rallying behind him scholars and quite a few British nobility who gave him political patronage. So he was a problem. They declared him a heretic, but he was one of the only reformers whom they couldn't kill. Of course, later with Luther and all, it became harder to kill the heretics. But other than that, most of the early reformers were in fact condemned as heretics by these universities and killed. Luther himself, it was 4 universities that had judged him to be a heretic, including Paris and Louvain and 2 others. Tyndale had been scrutinized by the University of Louvain and judged as a heretic. Huss was judged and condemned by his own university in Prague. So, in a sense, the people who created the modern world were products of these great universities in the sense that they had all studied there. Many of them had been professors there in different universities, Wycliffe in Oxford, Huss in Prague, Luther at Wittenberg. Tyndale was a product of Oxford, and he probably tutored a bit in Cambridge, and perhaps attended Wittenberg, but he was a refugee, he was a fugitive, so we don't have too many records of him. And then, of course, Calvin was a product of Paris, and before that, Erasmus had been teaching in different universities, Cambridge being the most special place, because that's where he finished his Greek New Testament and a fresh translation into Latin, which really finally triggered off the Reformation, because it was his Greek and Latin version which Luther read and realized that the whole of the theology and scholasticism of the last 1,000 years or so had been wrong, and what the church had been teaching and doing was wrong, which triggered the Reformation. So, in a sense, they were product of these universities, but in a more deeper sense, they were rebels who realized that these universities were wrong, and they stood up against the intellectual climate of their day. Now, this is, of course, important as we develop this whole theme, because if the West has to be reformed again, it's going to take those who have the courage to stand up against the intellectual climate of today. Now, Wycliffe and Luther and Tyndale, it would be lovely to tell their stories, but that's not what I'm attempting to do today, except to use them as illustrations to highlight some of the most important parts of their mission, aspects of their mission, which created our modern world. The first, and in a sense, the most important part from their own perspective, is that these were men who were fighting for truth. And this has to do with the question